Right. Good evening. Um, Today, firstly, welcome to the podcast. This podcast is titled "Let's Talk About Things," and it's essentially where I come and I interact with my audience or my friends, and I try and hold conversations with them while talking about a specific topic that I have in mind. Um, in that particular day or week that I want to talk about. And these streams can happen twice a week or sometimes three, four times a week. So yeah, let's get right into it. This is actually the third stream I'm doing. It's only titled one because the first two were taken offline. The first one was a test stream where I talked about dreams and it was quite eventful. We talked about how how dreams could potentially really shape my thoughts on things and just generally discuss the ideas, dreams, and the second stream was just about think about the unknown unknowns, and where I experimented with Jordan B. Peterson's lectures and try and actually go through it. In case for those of you who don't know, Jordan B. Peterson is a former leading psychologist in Canada. So you know what? Let's not spread misinformation. Okay. So Jordan Peterson, Canadian clinical psychologist, a YouTube personality, author, and of course a professor at the University of Toronto. He focuses on social psychology, and he has some really interesting lectures that is free and available for anyone who's interested, and it's all online for free for you to view. Right. So let's get right into it. Um, Hold on. Yeah. Okay. So I like to play a little bit of jazz in the background because some of my friends like jazz. And yeah, so we'll be watching one of his lectures from 2016. Yes, I know it's almost 6 years old, but trust me, it's still valid. This is a lecture on personality, and I think this sort of thing could help guide a lot of people through a lot of hard times if you stop and you think about yourself sometimes. And he talks about mythological elements of life story and all these kind of things. But if you look into his YouTube page, you'll see. Oh, this is his new book, Beyond Order. If you look through his YouTube playlists, he has a lot of past lectures that are actually very interesting, especially the 2017 Maps of Meaning. That's also a really interesting one. Psychological Significance of Biblical Stories. That's also another interesting one. And of course, this one also, 2015, Personality and Its Transformations. These are all really great lectures that I think if you have time, you can all go ahead and explore. But today, because it's the decline of summer, where people start becoming sad again. It's actually part of the first stream where I talk about human emotions and how weather might influence it. And some research articles come up with the idea that weather has nothing to do with human emotions. Others suggest otherwise, and also dating patterns. People tend to have more breakups at certain times of the year, and it could be attributed to holidays, but not weather. But stuff like this that makes talking about it so interesting because we look at the positives and the negatives, and sometimes even the potential of certain topics. Right. So let's get into it. Let me just pull up the YouTube so in case if I have any chats, I can just read it immediately. Okay, so this is Jordan B. Peterson in 2016. He looks much older now. He has gone through multiple stages of look at this handsome lad. He's gone through multiple stages of emotional breakdowns in the recent years due to, I think it was the far left, where it's about him. I don't know the details, but I think he came into scrutiny or like disagreement or agreement, but in some sort of logical sense, he tried to speak facts and it was twisted out just for the media, and he was still relevant, and I mean he is still relevant. He has been on Joe Rogan podcasts, and a lot of people still listen to him. But of course, we're not about to talk about what he has said in the few years leading to that incident. We're talking about his lecture in 2016, which is on a totally different topic besides the gender and identity stuff that he was under scrutiny for. Also, he has another book called 12 Rules of Life. I do recommend that people read this. If you're, I won't say it's a guide to life. I'll say it's a good idea to read it and organize your life. And you don't have to do a lot of things you said in there. It's really good if you follow. It could lead to massive success if you follow. But really go at your own pace. Just introducing Jordan B. Peterson to some of my audience who's not familiar with the world of psychology. Right, so let's get on with it. So this is the video that I want to look at. So it is an hour long. Of course, I'm going to skip certain parts. It's his lecture in 2016 about personality lectures. It's his third lecture. It's all online for free. Like I said, Jordan B. Peterson at youtube.com. Mythological elements of life, of the life story, and initiation. So let's get right into it.
So, there's a couple of things I want to tell you about today. Many things I want to tell you about. I want to tell you, I want to give you a schema that's going to enable you to understand, I think it'll enable you to understand stories like the one I told you last time. You remember Jonah and the whale.
Get real. Yeah, this is a new series, by the way, Gabe. And welcome to the stream.
I want to provide you with this schema so that you can understand stories like that, but many, many more stories like that. And partly what I'm telling you about today, in some sense, are archetypes. And an archetype is it's an idea that was made most popular over the last 100 years by Carl Jung, but it's a much older idea than that. It's really a Platonic idea in some ways, and it means something like fundamental pattern. And so an archetype can manifest itself in different ways. It could be a pattern of emotional response. So that could be something that you're feeling. It could be the way that emotional response displays itself on your body, on your face. It could be the way that emotion feels.
Just a full disclaimer. His language is extremely complex. Jordan B. Peterson has a really, really complex language, and it is easy to misinterpret. Even I misinterpret his stuff sometimes. But I think if you have the time to watch his lectures, do watch it with subtitles. Because his mind works differently. And later on, we'll get to a point where he talks about us knowing something. Sometimes you think you know someone, and you get to a point where you actually have an argument or some discrepancies with this person, and you find out that you have actually never known them before. For instance, he'll detail this in the video later on. This is one of the most memorable parts of this lecture. I don't know if I could find or shortlist it, but um, he gives an example where you are dating someone and you have been dating this person for many years. But then later on, you find out that this person has been cheating on you. So let's just have an example of you've been dating this person for 3 years, and for half of that 1.5, she's been cheating on you. He, she, whoever. So he's been cheating on you. And this begs the question, have you actually known this person? You actually know this person. You think you do. You think you do. You think you have known this person for 3 years. But actually, no, you don't. Because you've known them probably for 1.5 years. And the other half, the other 1.5, it was not them. It was a facade. It was something put up by them for, you don't know the actual reason. For lust, for their own personal gain, to satisfy their needs. Humans are sick. But this is one of the things Jordan B. Peterson talks about, where his personality lectures about how complex things can get, how our lives can get so chaotic, but how you can see it in a different light and how to put it back into motion. Sometimes when you're put into a new environment, you're bloody depressed, and there are things you have to do. The steps and processes you need to, overcome this. For instance, let's say you're moving overseas, and might sound exciting, but a few days before it happens, this freaking thing is going to dawn on you. It's going to happen, especially if you don't have the financial security you would like to have. When I mean financial security, I mean millions. I mean hundreds of thousands where you can go, all right, I can live for 5 years without worry, something like that. If you do have that financial security, things are fine, and then you'll have other problems, right? Like relationship, if you get into a relationship somewhere. But yeah, so
and displays itself on your face and then plays itself out as a drama in your local environment. So like an angry argument is an archetypal phenomenon. And the reason it's archetypal is because, well, you have one, them, you have them, you have them, you have them, everyone has them. So you can't really think about them as individual, you have to think about them as universal. And you can't think about them as something that you create in a sense, although in a sense you do, but also as something that happens
all in your head, right? But
now, when you read about Jung and archetypes, it's quite confusing because you can never be sure whether he's talking about an instinct, an emotion, a motivational system, or a sub-personality, or the sub-personality within which those things manifest itself, or even the social drama that's being played out in time and space in the social world. But a real archetype, I would say, is all of those things at the same time. Now, we use archetypal means of expression to represent how we act. And that's not the same thing as representing what the world is made out of. It's a very different thing. And so you could say, in some sense, we tell stories and understand stories so that we can figure out how people act and how they should act. And then we conduct science so that we can figure out what the world's like from a material objective perspective. And the two things coexist uneasily. I think the more primary form of knowledge is actually how to act, with the scientific model nested inside it, because the most important question that you have to solve as a living organism isn't what the world is made out of, it's how you should act in the world, say from a Darwinian perspective, even so that you can live long enough to reproduce.
This is, of course, controversial, like the last sentence he said.
It's how you should act in the world, say from a Darwinian perspective, even so that you can live long enough to reproduce.
So live long enough to reproduce. This is, of course, it is about, it's part of the topic. Well, in part of it, he will talk about it. He talks about it in one of his lectures, and I've heard of it before. But essentially, it's about humans finding the meaning of life, and this whole thing is absolutely fascinating because we think life has a lot of purpose. We categorize life as magical or some people that follow religion. We hold on. Sorry. Right. So we argue about the purpose of life, and some religion details the purpose of life, right? And, they talk about how sorry, they talk about how people. Hold on, I'll be right back. Okay, sorry, my father called, and wouldn't take. I'm busy for an answer, so. He doesn't read text. He just wants answers instantly. All right. Anyways, this is a bit controversial because this dabbles in the topic of religion and what people would find satisfactory, or uh, what answers people would find satisfactory, or what sort of answers people come up with to sort of seek that comfort in finding the purpose of life. And in many religion, it's of course going to the afterlife. In certain religion, it's about going to heaven. In others, it's about uh, reincarnation. And different cultures find comfort in different sorts of answers. And for instance, the Egyptians believed in, I think it was reincarnation, karma. The Hindus believed in karma. Buddhism also believed in reincarnation. Christians, the Islams, believe in going to heaven. So these sort of answers, telling people the purpose of life, is quite controversial because I don't want to dabble into religion. But what he means by you can live long enough to reproduce is part of another school of thought where we look at the fundamentals of organisms. So if you want to know something, you find the most simplest forms of something. Let's say we're talking about life, right? So we look at the simplest forms of life, bacteria, and these things they reproduce, they split in half, and they die. So they split in half and they die, cease to exist. So live long enough to reproduce is just reference to the purpose of human life or animal life or life in general, to pass down your DNA. That, of course, I'm not saying there's nothing more to life than just living it and having a great time. Yes, you want to have a great time, don't waste it. But the actual purpose, according to certain scholars, is to just reproduce, have pass down your DNA. That is it, right? Ensure that your DNA survives so that they could pass down their DNA, and ensure that they have enough knowledge that their DNA, that DNA can be passed down. It's sometimes you can see families who emphasize the importance of having male children settle with having grandkids. You know, they go, all right, you know what? I don't have sons, and I only have daughters. It's fine if I just have grandkids that carry my DNA, as long as that happens. There are different schools of thought, but long enough reproduce. I think
That's basically, from a strict biological perspective, in some sense, that's what you have to do in
there we
order
go.
to be successful. It's kind of obvious, first of all, because you're not very successful if you just go and die. And then, of course, death from a genetic perspective and failing to leave offspring are much the same thing. So, now, one of the questions might be, how is it that we conceive of the world as a place to act in? And that's partly, I'm going to outline a hypothesis for you and then explain the significance of that hypothesis. And the hypothesis involves the description of what you might consider constituent elements and also transformation processes. Okay, so as far as I can tell, the constituent elements of the stories that we tell about how people act and should act are characters. Now that makes sense, right?
So this is all right. You know what? I'm just gonna jot this down. His lectures are controversial, very controversial. Right? Let me just. We'll listen to it a little bit more, and I'll break it down. Uh, in
Because you really
in
can't
case
have
he
a drama
covers it.
or story without characters. Now, the thing is, the characters have to be understandable. And so, for them to be understandable, they sort of have to be like you, or they have to be like someone that you know, but they have to be human. But then again, it's not exactly that they're human, because even when you're telling a story about what happened to you today, it's interesting to think about what you do. So, someone might say, well, how was your day? And you say, fine. I mean, maybe that's the lowest level, lowest resolution, highest abstract story. My day was fine. It's a pretty boring story. It's better than terrible, I suppose, but it's not interesting and it's not detailed. But the person gets the notion that things went according to plan, or more specifically, that things unfolded the way you wanted them to, which is not exactly the same as according to plan. Because a plan is kind of a cold cognitive thing, you know, or expectation. The cognitive scientists sort of use.
I didn't talk about it. So characters is in another thought. Um, Actors in part of a story, and it can be about people who um, are in. Let's just talk about a great utopia, and you generally get these actors who are flawless and they do good and all these kind of things. So, you know, you have characters, and one of this conversation I've had with my uncle was I asked if he was religious, and he said he would rather believe in the ancient Greeks and the Roman mythology, believe in Zeus as a god, than believe in Christianity. Yeah, bloody controversial, I know, but the reasoning behind this is because, in his opinion, he thinks that there is no perfect being. And given that the Greek gods are flawed, they commit adultery, they commit crimes, they make mistakes, stuff like this. Uh, Given that Greek mythology includes stuff like this, it makes them a powerful being or something to be feared of more believable. Now, I'm not saying that, you know, whatever religion people believe in is wrong. I'm just saying it can be another school of thought where some things can be too perfect.
Is whether, well, while how you wanted them to implies that you have desires and emotions and motivations, and that they inform the way that you're acting in the world. Because you don't just act in the world, you act in the world so that you try to turn it into something better than it is right now, assuming you have any sense. You know, because some people act on the world to make it worse than it is now, but we're going to forget about those people for now. So when you say fine to someone, you basically say, roughly speaking, I got what I wanted today without undue hassle. Okay. So,
Or when I say I'm fine, I could say I got through today without thinking of anything much. It's it's a very lazy response, and if you're in a relationship, don't do that. If you're in a relationship, don't say how. If you ask if your partner asks you how was your day, you want to respond with something besides fine, because fine is boring, and that's what defines what makes your relationship interesting. You know?
So that's a really condensed version of the events of the day, and it's not a very good story, although it might suffice for casual conversation. A person might
Get
say,
people
no, no,
with your
no,
back.
what did you do today? And then maybe you'll say, oh, I woke up this morning and I went to university, and the subway took a lot longer than it usually does, and so I used that time to do some studying, and then I got to school and I had a particularly dull lecture, but lunch was really good and I met some friends. And so that's kind of a story, right? And the person that you're talking to might listen to you. It's not a particularly compelling story, but it's probably better than fine. And you might say, well, why did you select those elements to talk about? You didn't talk about how many times you blinked your eyes the first minute that you woke up, and you didn't describe the motor movements that you used to put your left leg on the floor, and you didn't describe, what bowl you used for breakfast. And the reason you didn't do that is because A, you don't remember.
The fun thing is talking about what bowl you use for breakfast, how many times you blinked. It's stuff you'll see in a bloody storybook. It's stuff you'll read. There are things where there are books where I've read and it says woke up in this room and glaring lights, and it's descriptive words that helps carry the narrative. But what he's trying to say is you don't use these kind of narratives in life, and what you do is you tend to select out the things that are meaningful, more
Whatever
meaningful.
reason. And B, you don't care, and neither does your listener. But that's the peculiar thing, is that your listener is going to care about some things and not care about other things. And if you're a good storyteller, you kind of automatically know which of those things that you should talk about so that you're interesting, and which of the things you should ignore so that you're not boring your listener to death. And you also understand that they will also understand it. But you don't know how you do that. All you know is that you're trying to tell an interesting story. And in some sense, what you're doing is you're trying to reduce a sequence of actions and conceptions of exceptional complexity to the gist, right? Which is like the essential or the moral in some sense. And you're trying to convey that. And the other person is listening, partly because they want to indicate that they care for you and would like to know, they want to stay caught up with your ongoing narrative so that they understand you. And maybe also because they might think that they'll garner some bit of information, factual or behavioral, that might aid them in some way. And we're doing that to each other all the time. We automatically do this. We automatically know how to tell stories. And so what I'm saying is that even the person that you describe when you describe yourself to someone else isn't exactly you. It's some representation of you as a sort of generic human being that's going about doing certain kinds of interesting things in the world. Or here's a way of thinking about it roughly, is that you make yourself the hero of your own story. And so you kind of know that.
That's harsh,
when you
isn't
go
it?
to a movie, and movies are usually romances, say, or hero stories.
That's harsh, isn't it?
Romances or adventures
You make
or
yourself
both,
the
roughly
hero of your own
speaking.
story.
And sometimes they turn out well, and that's a comedy, and sometimes they don't.
Goes to show you can't really trust the narrative because, well, I mean, you can try and be as neutral as possible, but then again, you can't really trust yourself because storytelling isn't built. Unless you're extremely bad at storytelling, then you might say things in the way you see, and that could still be one-sided, I guess. But I think it's best to have a third party tell the story sometimes.
Don't turn out so well, and that's a tragedy. But when you go there, what you basically see is a story about another person who's sort of like you, who's the hero, and what you do is you track them through a sequence of adventures. And usually what you track them through isn't things were good and then they stayed good, and then at the end they were still the same as they were at the beginning and good. Because why do you want to watch that? And you might say, well, you should, because isn't that pleasant? The person's happy, and then they stay happy, and then they end happy, and everyone's happy. It's why isn't that interesting? But it isn't. And really what you want to see is, you want to see someone get into trouble and fail in a spectacularly interesting way, or you want to see someone get into trouble and then overcome it in a spectacularly interesting way. And so there's this idea in the story that the person has to undergo some kind of transformation in the midst of their travails and efforts in order for it to be interesting. So they have to start in one place, they have to end up somewhere that's not so good in a very, very complicated way, and then maybe by transforming their character, or by transforming the surroundings, or by coming to some sort of realization, or maybe just by dim-witted luck, they manage to solve the set of problems and emerge triumphant at the other end. Right, so that's the meaning of Jonah and the whale. Now remember what happens to Jonah is that he's got this destiny he's supposed to be pursuing, and he decides that it's too much trouble. Well, not unsurprisingly, because if you remember, what he was told to do was go to tell a whole city that they were misbehaving, assuming rightly as he did that that would not make him particularly popular, and maybe he'd get killed, and even if he didn't, it would be extraordinarily difficult. He thought, there's no damn way I'm doing that. So he denied his destiny, and as a consequence, he fell into the abyss and was swallowed up. And then because he repented and decided to carry on with his responsibilities, the creature of the abyss spit him back up, and he got to go along his merry way. Now you might say, well, nothing like that has ever happened to you, but that's wrong. Things like that happen to you all the time, and you know it. So to some sort of realization, or maybe just by dim-witted luck, they managed to solve the set of problems and emerge triumphant at the other end. Right, so that's the meaning of Jonah and the whale. Now remember what happens to Jonah is that he's got this destiny he's supposed to be pursuing, and he decides that it's too much trouble. Well, not unsurprisingly, because if you remember, what he was told to do was go to tell a whole city that they were misbehaving, assuming rightly as he did that that would not make him particularly popular, and maybe he'd get killed, and even if he didn't, it would be extraordinarily difficult. He thought, there's no damn way I'm doing that. So he denied his destiny, and as a consequence, he fell into the abyss and was swallowed up. And then because he repented and decided to carry on with his responsibilities, the creature of the abyss spit him back up, and he got to go along his merry way. Now you might say, well, nothing like that has ever happened to you, but that's wrong. Things like that happen to you all the time, and you know it. So here's a couple of examples, and you'll be able to draw all sorts of examples from your own life. That's a story of betrayal. For example, maybe in one of your relatively uninformed flurries, you ended up establishing a relationship with someone who was really not good for you.
Okay, so this is threading on the topics of relationships now. This is, here on out, things might get a little bit sensitive, but he do have a point. He does have multiple points, and it helped me get through my hard times. So, we'll see.
And that might mean, well, it was just a bad personality match, or it might mean they really weren't good for you, because, you can get pretty unlucky, and you can get tangled up with someone who's very deceitful and very malevolent, and who could care less about you, or maybe who even wants to hurt you. And then you can establish...
Yeah, there are some people like that, who only seek the benefits in the relationship, and if you try and reciprocate, they... I want to say... I think that there are much far less kinds of people like this, but of course there are people who are in it for something, but you won't get them to spit it out, right? You won't get them to say what they really want.
Push a trusting relationship with them, or at least you trust them, and then one day, you find out that they are not who they said they were, or even more importantly, they are not who you thought they were. And so then maybe you're in a committed relationship and they betray you with someone else. And so then you think, well, there you are at home, and you're perfectly happy about being at home, and then your partner comes home, and for one reason or another, you find out that they're having an affair, or that they've betrayed you, or that they've lied to you in some other spectacularly important way. And maybe it's a lover, maybe it's a family member, maybe it's a sibling, and maybe it's a friend. Whatever. It doesn't matter. And so here's the way of thinking about it. The minute before they come home, you're in one place. You remember, a place isn't just a place, right? A place is a place in time. Because we live in space-time. We live in time and place. And what that means is you can be in the same place in 1 minute and a completely different place in the next minute, even if you haven't even moved. And so place is a very, very complicated idea. So you're sitting at home and you're watching Oprah, and you're perfectly content to do that, and then the person comes home and the bottom of your world falls out. And then all of a sudden you're not where you thought you were. And it's a really weird place that you are now, because it's not where you were. That's for sure. But you also don't know where it is, because you don't know.
Because it's new. You know, where you landed out, when you find out a lot of things, either a massive lie or just anything you find out, it's... Well, the hardest part is you figure out, or you think you know something, and turns out you actually don't. And that's, you try and hold on to what you know, but you can't trust what you know.
So, who that person is that's in that room with you, you don't know what your past with them was, or what it meant, or anything else about it, because it was predicated on absolute misperceptions. So none of your memories about those events are valid, even though you have them as memories. And then you have a worse problem, which is if you're betrayed badly enough, not only are you not going to understand your immediate past with that person, oh, and by the way, your future's also gone, so that's a big problem, as is your present has become radically more complex. But it's worse than that, because if you're really betrayed, you're also going to think, who am I that I could be that stupid? And then you're going to think, what is a human being that they can be that corrupt? And so not only have the fundamentals been kicked out of the substructure of your perceptions, but your notion of what it means to be you and what it means to be human might have been seriously disrupted. And the thing about that's a non-trivial event. People call that traumatic. It's like a physical wound. In fact, it certainly, if the trauma is great enough, it can produce a psychophysiological wound, because that sort of trauma, a deep betrayal is a good example, will damage your brain. And maybe you'll recover from it, and maybe you won't. And one of the ways...
So this is why stuff like this can be very hard to talk about. When you're dealing with betrayal. And of course he has a speech on how being cheated on, or can be a great thing. He doesn't contradict himself. He says if your partner is truly sorry for what they did, and you are willing to get down to the root cause and the root problem and solve it, and and take steps to secure that trust again, and to rebuild that fundamental, or give them a reason for what happened, then it could be a good thing for your relationship. And of course, you don't want to be somebody who just accepts everything someone says. You have sometimes, if you really can't take it anymore, and if you really feel betrayed so much, just go, right? But if you really, really like that person, and you think they really like you too, and it could be a not just drunken mistake, or a drugged mistake, it's, and they are willing to take the necessary steps, tell you where they go and stuff like this, show you who they're going out with, especially in a relationship, is when something like this happens, to mitigate the amount of doubt you have, because like you said, it damages your brain. Mentally, you might recover from it, other times you don't. And there are things that you might know or might think that you have recovered from, or any psych, uh, psychological damage has been caused. Everyone has a little bit um, that has been caused that you think you might have overcome, right? Sometimes you do, yeah, and sometimes when you don't, it really gets to you, and that's what he's saying. How trauma and phobias, or not phobias, traumas happen.
That's been represented forever in mythological stories is by being swallowed up by a subterranean beast. It's something that comes up from the depths and pulls you down, and then you're in it. Now, why is that? Well, that's an extraordinarily complicated question, but here's the answer as nearly as I can tell. We evolved a very complicated neuropsychological system to signal alarm. So that's anxiety, threat sensitivity, right? And that makes us freeze, for example. And when you look at how an animal uses that system, let's say a mammal, just to keep it simple, because we're all mammals, and so we can kind of understand mammals. So if a rabbit sees a wolf, for example, it's going to freeze so that the wolf can't see it. And if a rat smells a cat, even if it has never smelled a cat in its whole life, it's going to also freeze. And interestingly, with rats, if you put rats in a natural environment, which means they get to have little rat dominance hierarchies, little rat families, and they're not like little white rats alone in a cage. They're happy family rats, and they've got their burrows and they live in their little societies, and maybe there's a part of their territory where they can go get food, and they're used to that, so they'll scurry out there in the day kind of hiding because they don't like light, or maybe they'll scurry out at night because rats are night things, and they'll get their food and they'll eat it or bring it back, or whatever they do to share it with their family, or at least bring it back. Well, let's say that you put a cat out there, or maybe you even just put a cat there and take it away so that the place smells like cat. Well, one of those rats goes out there and sees that cat. First of all, it's going to freeze, and it is not a happy thing. Because imagine, you're a rat, and a thing that's 4 times as big as a lion suddenly appears on your front yard. It's like, that's rough, man. You're going to freeze, and then you're going to go hide downstairs, and what are you going to do? Well, if you're a rat, you're going to scream
Phobia,
24 hours. Which is non-stop with your little beak poking out of your burrow so everyone can hear you scream. And that's the same, given the length of a rat's life, as you screaming non-stop for 2 weeks. So like that rat's nervous. It's not happy about the whole cat thing. And then maybe, if no more cat odor happens by and no hyper-vigilant rats see any more cats, then after it screams for, 2 weeks, it starts to calm down a little bit. And maybe then it starts to remember that it's hungry and that it, there's things to attend to, and so then maybe it very, very carefully goes back out where it was foraging for food, sort of crouched over and hyper vigilant and not moving very much in case that damn cat's around, and then maybe slowly it regains control over its territory. It runs back and forth, trying to ensure that none of that place that used to be safe has got troublesome cats associated with it anymore. And so in some sense, the bottom fell out of that rat's life. Now,
you touch the dangers, you sample it again.
The thing is, the rat has predator detection systems that are associated with extreme anxiety and escape that are automatically activated whenever there's a predator in sight. And we have those systems too. But human beings are, you might say, well, okay, rats have predators, enemies. Humans have predators, enemies. Okay, so then we might say, well, what's a human predator/enemy? Well, it depends on how long a period of time over which you wish to calculate what constitutes human. Because we know, for example, that 60 million years ago, your primary predator, when you were wandering around in trees, and were only about this big, was snakes. And so snake is a predator and an enemy. And you guys can easily learn how to be afraid of snakes, and maybe you're innately afraid of them to begin with. The science on that is not exactly clear, although it certainly indicates that you could easily learn snake fear, and it probably indicates that really it's innate. It's innate in chimpanzees, so why not in us? It's not that long since we split off the evolutionary pathway from the common chimp human ancestor. So enemies, snakes. What else? How about crocodiles? Those things pulled a lot of your ancestors, well, not your ancestors, because they got pulled out of the water, but when we were wandering around on the African
Yeah, it was heights,
belt and we went down to the river to have some water, you can be sure that a fair number of us got pulled underneath by crocodiles. And so crocodiles, and those are creepy things, crocodiles. They figure in nightmares and they figure in horror movies, and you can imagine yourself in Florida out there with the alligators and thinking, it'd be just as well if they didn't come too close to your boat with their little beady eyes and their great big teeth. And, they're unpleasant things. And then there's lions, hyenas. Okay, and what are those things? You might think a lion and a hyena are different things, but they're not. I would say they're large-toothed mammalian carnivores. It's like a meta-category. And so they sort of fit in that predator-enemy category. And your nervous system is prepared to respond to predatory eyes and teeth. And no wonder, because predatory eyes track you down and teeth eat you and they bite you. And so it's a good thing that you're aware of those and that you can detect them rapidly. What else is a human enemy? How about another human? How would that be? You think more people have died from other humans or from predators? I suspect that since we've actually been human, if that's maybe 150,000 years, because that's about when it appears that we were more or less genetically identical to what we are now, my guess is that humans have got it all over predators. I mean, lots of us got eaten. Let's not be too, shy about discussing that. But now, at least, man, it's other people. Okay, well, what about yourself? How about you as your own enemy? Well, or then you can make it psychological. Maybe it's not other people. Maybe it's the evil in their hearts. Or maybe it's the evil in your hearts. So you see, this is a way of thinking about it. So we have a circuit to deal with threats. But the threats exist all the way from the primordial biological, like actual predators, like snakes, all the way up to the incredibly abstract, like my great enemy is the evil intentions that other people harbor towards me or that maybe I have in my own heart.
Essentially, fear of instincts and natural predators. I don't know, we had this conversation about dreams. I think it was in the first stream, it was in the second where I brought it back up. And I had this conversation where, you had that dream of yourself falling. And I have never lived, well, not consciously, lived in a super tall place and actually looked down the balcony. Well, I mean, now I have, when I'm an adult, but when I was young, I've always lived in land properties, or if I did live in apartments, I didn't live there for a long enough duration to actually actively look down, stare down the depths, and just look at the floor through like however many stories up. So my dreams of myself falling was tame. Was me jumping off from a 3-story house and landing on the ground floor. Second story, landing on the ground floor. But my friends who have lived in apartments had these fears of himself jumping down 11 floors, 11 bloody stories, and waking up just before he hits the ground. It's fascinating to me when he brought it up. Hey, Reem, have you had that dream of yourself falling? Yeah. And I was like, yeah, I had this dream of myself falling from 2 stories high. He goes, 2 stories? Mine was 11. So I figured, why do we all have dreams? Is it because we think, or genetically we're programmed to have this fear of heights, where heights are dangerous, don't jump, these kinds of fears. And no doubt, the same thing could happen from, if we say crocodile, it could be water, fear of water, where you can't see the bottom. Or, if you were to see a pool that you can't see the bottom, I think that kind of pulls you back from jumping into it. If you have a clear pool, then yeah, you would jump. Probably, maybe. But now we know better. We see 10 meters, we don't jump into 10 meters if you don't know how to swim. And another instance of this kinds of fear is probably tall grass, where tigers hunt very well. They can hide very well, or cheetahs or pumas, they can hide in tall grass very well. And so, when I see tall grass, I tend to not want to walk into tall grass. I've actually tried to. I live near a lake, and I've tried walking through patches of stuff, trying to go fishing. And I find it more comforting to walk on muddy ground or sand than to walk past tall grass, even though it's not a lot of tall grass. And it probably has something to do with the fear of snakes and stuff like this that has been genetically encoded into many of us since birth. So, in a way, I guess we do learn things from birth. Just it doesn't manifest itself until later.
Developed individual, he has to go down to the bottom of the ocean into a whale and rescue his father. Well, it doesn't take a lot of imagination to see the kinship between that story and the story of Jonah. It's the same story. Jonah had to reestablish his relationship with God the Father in order to successfully make a passage from aimless and disobedient character to someone who was alive on shore pursuing a particular path. It's the same motif. It's a very, very, very common motif. And the reason for that is that that's how people transform. They hit an obstacle of some sort that just blows them into pieces. They go down into the depths, into the abyss, and they live down there for a while, and it's not pleasant. And maybe they learn something while they're down there, if they're lucky, and they get back up. And that's the story of human development. You never learn something without having something small die, and sometimes you learn something and something big dies. And then, you put yourself back together and you pick up the pieces and you emerge unscathed, hopefully, and perhaps transformed, and you carry on. So the human developmental story isn't an upward march in a linear manner, up an even slope. It's perhaps upwards and onwards, but it's like this. It's punctuated by catastrophes. And of course, you guys...
Massive catastrophes. Kind of look at World War One, and after 10 years, people forgot about it, and bam, there you go, second. But yeah, it's gonna happen again. It's gonna happen again. It's why there's war down in Eastern Europe right now, and this whole thing is not fun.
You guys know that, because obviously, how many people in this room have been seriously unhappy at one point in their life for more than 2 weeks? Okay, is there anyone who hasn't had that experience? Yes? Have you not had that experience? Oh, yeah, sorry, I thought you raised your hand. Has anybody not had that experience? Okay, so maybe not you? Well, that's good. Congratulations. That's really amazing. So it's coming. So
right. How to deal with it?
Yeah.
How are you going to deal with it?
So the thing is, here's one way of looking at it. That's reality. Reality is that your environment is punctuated by descents. Your pathway is punctuated by descents. And when you're ascending, that's one place. When you're descending and at the bottom, that's another place. And I can tell you, and this will help you with your interpretation of stories, is that the times when you descend is equivalent to a voyage to the underworld. That's what a voyage to the underworld means in mythology. The bottom has fallen out and down you go. And you know this sort of thing.
It's interesting because sometimes when you've fallen down before and you climb your way up, the next time you fall, it's as easy to climb your way up as it was. But sometimes when life gets too sweet and you don't climb yourself up so often, it happens. And this is why you have people who who seemingly lost something and just ruined it. They before they seem to have everything, and when something bad happens that they just can't deal with, it looks like they just lose everything, right? It could be a death of a family member, it could be a loss of a loved one, and those two are the same. Or I'm told probably a breakup, a massive breakup. But people deal with things differently. And one of the things that got me through some of these harsh times was telling myself that I'm not the only one who has to deal with this kind of crap. And other people has dealt with it. Some people has quit. Some people have quit dealing with this. Some people overcame it. Which one do I want to be? And, this sort of thinking really got me through the death of I was really close with my grandfather. In case people question how close I was, I would go back to Penang. That's the north of Malaysia. It's on an island. And it's a pretty hefty 5-6 hour drive, sometimes by bus, to go visit. And I would play chess with him because that's the way we communicate after he lost his hearing. When I was a kid, he would take care of me sometimes as well. And one of the, I didn't cry much at his funeral because I've dealt with the death of grandparents before. And at that time, it might have been too young to understand what that meant. But when I did, it was already a few weeks after, and it was this spiral of depression that I climbed out of unknowingly. And the loss of my grandfather was tremendous, right? And I somehow saw to it as something I've done and something that happens, and there's nothing more he could have done. He has done as much as he can, passed down his genes and all these kind of stuff. So I took it much better than I expected I would. My friends were shocked because I remember I had this friend, her name is Saibia, and I remember Emma was there with me as well. When I received news, I went up to the teacher and I said my grandfather had passed. And I went back to my table, and the three of them were shocked that I had tears. I had tears in my eyes, but I wasn't making a massive scene. So I think people expect you to act a certain way, and if having climbed out of it, you tend to act different. And now that it has been many, many years since someone had passed, who knows if I lose something again, what deep of a hole I'll drop myself into, what kind of floor, will it be the floor from the 11th floor that collapses, or will it just be, the ground floor? And of course, there's going to be pain, there's going to be hurt. I still cried, but it was a few tears that came out, and I'm sure my grandfather knows that I loved him very much, even though I didn't really cry at his funeral. I cried before I arrived. Spent 3 days around. I didn't really take the last look at him because I thought I had my eyes closed. And my mom wasn't. She respected my choice to not have that last glimpse. But yeah.
Because, look, if I say we're all skating on thin ice, like, is there anybody here who doesn't know what that means? Okay, so what does it mean? What does it mean? Right, the ice can fall out at any time, and then what happens? Yeah, down you go. Right, and it's cold down there. Yeah, and maybe you don't get back up. Yeah, and it's the sort of story that sort of sends a chill down your spine. And it should, because that's life. And so one of the things that I really like about advanced personality theory is that it takes that into account. It says, yeah, that's life. Okay, now that we've established that, what do we do? And so then it becomes something like this. It's not so much how do you stop yourself from descending and ascending. That's good luck with that. But
it happens
since
anyways.
you're going to have to do that, How do you do it? And so part of the reason that I call this course Personality and Its Transformations is because one thing that you can learn about.
And I remember Jordan B. Peterson had one of these lectures where he talked about something like this and how you overcome it. And there was a guy later on one of the podcasts. He talked about the guy had lost his father, and through remembering what Jordan B. Peterson said, the guy picked himself up and proceeded to continue with the necessary steps, with undergoing a funeral. It's like, yes, the devastating thing has happened. You can grieve, but you still gotta pick yourself up, right? And someone's gotta do it. Someone's gotta arrange. Someone's gotta sign a document. Someone's gotta arrange things like funeral, or someone's gotta purchase the coffin, find a place for the memorial, send out the letters, send out news. Someone's gotta do it.
About yourself
Right,
is who
and
you are,
the guy
and that's
thanked
really useful. But the other thing that you can learn about yourself is how it is that you can conduct yourself across time. And that means you're going to have to conduct yourself so that you can weather storms. And some of those might be you make a mistake and the ice breaks, and some of it is the ice breaks. And it's no mistake at all. It's just how it is. So when one of your parents develops Alzheimer's disease, for example, well, you can say that's your mistake because you're not smart enough to do anything about it. And, you better clue in, because otherwise the disease is going to continue. But on the other hand, really thinking about it as a personal fault seems inappropriate. It's just a catastrophe that's associated with being alive. And that's what life is, And so one of the things you see, for example, in all of the major trends of religious thinking all around the world, and I talk about religious thinking because those are the deepest kinds of stories. That's really what makes them religious, by the way. It's always the same message. Life is suffering. And the reason for that is because we skate on thin ice. Okay, and you can say, well, we should thicken up the damn ice, and fair enough, right, definitely. But you should also prepare yourself to swim so that when you fall in, you don't die. So, now, the Job story has a hint or two in it, So the first thing that happens is Job is in some sense called to action. Now, because that's an old story, because it's a primarily Judeo-Christian and religious story, the call to action takes the force of a divine command. Right? Now you might think, well, does such a thing exist? And it's a silly question in some ways, because whether or not something exists depends on what you mean by exist, and that can vary with your philosophical presuppositions. But it also varies on why you're asking the question and where you're looking for the answer. So, for example, here's an example. Do you believe that there are things that you should do? Like, is there anyone here who doesn't believe that? Or more importantly, is there anyone here who doesn't act like they believe it? So you wake up in the morning and you think, yeah, there's a bunch of things I should do. Or there's some things I should do next week. Or there's some things I should do with my life. Yes? That's a common thought? Does anyone not think that way? Okay, so, if you're not thinking that way, you end up pretty depressed, because then you think, well, there's nothing I should do with my life. And that's not such a happy thought, because life is hard, and then if there's nothing to do with it, well, all you're there stuck with is a bunch of suffering, and that doesn't seem like a very good idea. Okay, so then you might say, well, what exactly does should mean? Well, it means that you have a moral obligation of some sort. You might say, well, you decided that yourself. And the answer to that is like, no, wrong. You haven't decided that yourself. Are you kidding? You'd be a complete psychopath if you decided that by yourself, right? I mean, if you're even the vaguest bit civilized, then you decide what it is that you should do, or what you should do manifests itself within you as a context of a dialogue that you're continually having with yourself, but also with everyone around you. And not only with everyone around you, but with the entire history of mankind. Because we're all historical creatures, and what you think you should do is being shaped by what your parents think, and that was shaped by what their parents thought, and that was shaped by what their parents thought, and so on back into the
hereditary
depths of history as far back as you can
reactions.
possibly imagine, both historically and biologically. So in some sense, there is a call to action within people. Now, in any sort of quest story, like The Hobbit, let's say, or The Lord of the Rings for that matter, the story always starts with a call to action, right? For some reason or another, the little hobbit character, which by the way is the hobbits live in this little protected place, and they're not very big, and they're not very smart, and they don't know about the wide world beyond them where the great forces of good and evil are at combat. And one hobbit who's a little bit more adventurous than the rest gets called upon to act, and in the Hobbit stories, it's usually the wizard who manages it, right? So it's a magical figure of some sort who's extraordinarily wise and extraordinarily old, who might as well be God for all intents and purposes, who says, it's time for you to go and become a thief. Well, that's what happens in The Hobbit, right? It's a very weird thing, because obviously that's Frodo, right? Frodo's the Hobbit in The Hobbit, and Bilbo's the Hobbit in The Lord of the Rings, if I remember correctly. Other way around? Bilbo is the Hobbit in The Hobbit. Fine.
Yeah,
Bilbo.
it's 2015. Okay. Yeah, people still remember about stuff like this because it's actually on their Christmas watch list. What do you watch for Christmas now, eh? Is it still Home Alone?
So Bilbo gets called to action, and he's gonna go find a dragon. Well, the dragon is the same thing that swallowed Joe. It's the same story, and the dragon has a treasure, which is a weird thing. It's like, what's up with dragons, right? What do they hoard? Virgins. That's the St. George story. It's a very, very old story. Or gold.
Really? St. George story. Really, really old. They hoard virgins. Kind of like certain, this is quite interesting. Because if you look at rewards in stories, I am sure along the times things get different, and nowadays, of course, it's portrayed in music where rewards isn't just about money; it's about the things money can buy, private jets, and cars, and of course, money, alcohol, women, and houses. It's reflected in songs, right? And back then, when people were much more depressed in the 1900s, it's in the jazz, in their music, their stories, it's about being happy and being in love. Probably because they went to war and a bunch of men alone. They had these sparks of music, and if we go further back, probably the same thing happened. And as to why people come up with these kinds of rewards in stories, gold and stuff like that, is because probably at that time it's much more desirable than anything else. So, virgins, if you apply the same knowledge, should be something that is of an interesting topic to discuss.
And that's weird behavior for a predatory lizard. But anyways, you accept that without any problem. Of course a dragon lives underground in a big mountain that was excavated by dwarves and sits on a treasure. It's like, we don't have any problem with that idea. Well, why? Really? You really believe that? And the answer is, well enough to read the damn book and to make how many people went and watched The Lord of the Rings? How many people
I even have a
think about it
chessboard,
worldwide? How much
Lord
money
of the Ring
did
game board.
Harry Potter generate? I bet you Harry Potter generated more money than the remaining steel mills in Britain if you calculated it across the amount of time since those stories emerged.
Jesus.
So, of course, there's a predatory lizard in Harry Potter, too. It's the thing that skitters around underneath Hogwarts and turns you to stone with the glance of an eye. Oh, and does that lizard hoard virgins? Well, what's the name of the girl that he kidnaps? Ginny. Right, okay. What's the word Ginny from? Virginia. Right? Good. Right. And she's Harry's first love interest, and he rescues her from the damn snake. And he gets paralyzed while he's doing it. what rescues Harry? Phoenix, right? A phoenix. Okay, so the basilisk bites Harry, so he's going to die. The phoenix comes along. Who owns the phoenix? Dumbledore. Yeah, yeah. What does the phoenix do? Cries. And it cries into Harry's wounds. Yes? What happens? Then what happens to Harry? He comes back to life. It's a death and resurrection story. So the thing that's willing to die and resurrect is the thing that gets the virgin from the snake. Does that make sense? Well, you think it makes sense, even though you don't really know why it makes sense. And then what happens to the phoenix after it does that? Burns itself up in a puff of flame and is reborn. So it's the story told twice. The thing that dies and is reborn is the thing that conquers the serpent and rescues the feminine, roughly speaking. So it's not gold in that situation, but it doesn't matter. It's the same story. It's always the same story. So and when you don't hear that story, like when your culture isn't providing you with rich stories of that sort that are derived directly from your tradition, somebody like an unemployed welfare mother in Britain has it pop up full-fledged in her brilliant imagination and lays out 7 books and makes herself more money than the queen. Right. And that, it's a Cinderella story. It's a bloody amazing story. And then there's all those books, and all those kids learn to read because of the books. And then there's all those movies, and everybody goes and sees them, and no one notices that they don't know what the hell they're doing while they're doing it. And it follows the same old story. All right. So you've got your individual, that's you, the hero. Then you got the adversary to that. That's your enemy, wherever that enemy might happen to be. That's forces that oppose you, but mostly psychological forces of one form or another. Then you've got the father. Well, there's 2 kinds of fathers.
Hey Adam, so no, I just started a new thing where I talk about things, and I'm just watching through Jordan B. Peterson's lecture, trying to figure out, the many questions we have to life and all these kind of things, and some of the things we talked about were. Yeah, like you think, about betrayal and coming to the realization that, it happens, and how you overcome it, or overcome the death of someone and all these kind of stuff. The whole video is structured around Jordan B. Peterson, who is a really fascinating social psychologist, and now I'm just scrolling through some parts. So previously we talked about over here, I think it was 8 minutes timestamp in this video. In my stream it's probably 10 minutes. No, sorry, definitely not 10 minutes, 15 minutes in. We talked about
really interesting way. And so
you thinking you know someone, and then coming to the realization that you actually don't.
Right, so okay. What do you think of the U of T? Like your first year, did you enjoy it? How many people didn't enjoy it? Okay, how many people did enjoy it? All right, so more, by the looks of things, some of you are neutral. You neither enjoyed it or didn't enjoy it, or you don't have the mental energy to like crank your arm up or down. So, okay, so most of you didn't enjoy it. What the hell are you doing here then? Like, why bother? So someone who didn't enjoy it, answer me that. Maybe you really didn't enjoy it, but here you are. Why are
This stuff is way too deep for you to digest on a Saturday evening. Yeah, and previously I had a stream where I talked about dreams and stuff, and how it really psychologically fucked with me, dreams. And the whole conversation we had was about psychedelics and what sort of dreams I used to experience when I was a kid. And this whole topic is really, really interesting because it touches on the subject of psychedelics and what we perceive as nightmares, or what I used to perceive as nightmares. I used to think that nightmares were bad things or bad dreams. You wake up with heart pounding and all these kind of things. But I used to have dreams of myself, of me feeling my body expand And through me talking to a few people, they have never had dreams like this before. So I'm trying to find some people who experience the same thing, where in your head, your body expands. And you're awake to experience it all, but your body expands, and you start focusing in on details around the room. Like my face and body would expand so much that my eyes would be almost touching the ceiling, or I could feel, yeah, in my head when I was dreaming. I was awake. I'm talking to my parents as to what I feel. And I remember one of these instances. I was awake. I ran downstairs into the living room, and I told my parents I am about to have uh, uh, a nightmare. I thought it was a nightmare, and then it was then immediately, bam! As I told them that, it kind of opened the gateway to my body. Just it's not physically expanding. It just felt like it was. And one of these instances that I remembered the most was my arm, my left hand, my left arm growing so long, and it stretched, I think, a good solid 30 feet to the dining table. I was in the living room and felt as if my hand was grabbing the dining table. And turns out what happened was I physically wasn't there, but I felt like I was. And a lot of things like that. And yeah, into Mr. Fantastic. Elastigirl from Incredibles. But the whole idea was that this sounded like a psychedelic trip that people would have, and that was essentially what I was experiencing. So when I told my uncle about my bad dreams when I was a kid, he was like, "Boy, I'll tell you this when you're older." And when I was older, he told me, he was like, "Yeah, those were not dreams. Those were not nightmares. Those were more like psychedelic trips." And this whole thing really, really got me thinking: was my brain producing enough chemicals for me to have psychedelic trips so bad, and that it really put an effect to me? And because you think my uncle has no experience with psychedelics, you're wrong. He has, and because he lives in Europe, and he has been to churches where he drinks. Certain churches have these rituals where you sit in a circle and you drink a psychedelic drink. I forgot what's it called? And he's seen people throwing up, but everyone would have different trips. Where one of was seeing colors and patterns with colors, with your eyes wide open, and it's hard to explain it, but I could generally describe it for you. Imagine seeing black, and then making that black sheet in your computer, make it transparent, and numb your whole body, but not too much. You're still conscious that you're there. You can feel yourself, like you can feel, like right now you can feel yourself, but you just can't move. It's like being it's like trapped in the body, like when you're it's like being trapped in your body. What's that called? Sleep paralysis. But with your eyes half open, you see patterns and colors, and you can feel your heart pounding and pulsing, and you can even feel your blood veins, your temples, and the blood coursing through your temples, and all these kind of things. And this whole experience, and when I was told that, yeah, open your eyes and you see colors and stuff like that, that is minimal. But and this is minimal. And what I experienced that I remembered the most was my eyes were freaking wide open, and I was conscious. I was walking. I walked downstairs, and I literally I was breathing heavily, and I told my parents, "I can't breathe. I'm about to have a nightmare." And bam, there we go. We have that psychedelic trip that I was going through. Massive, massive bad trip. And later on in my life, I had good trips where, yes, it was psychedelic, like the rest, but it was more patterns and colors and stuff like that. And there were times where I was just, just fucking high out of my mind, screaming when I was in the living room. So yeah, it's very interesting. And my parents would have the same thing to say. My aunt would have the same thing to say, and it's it's fascinating because everyone in my family remembers me having it. I remember me having it. I remember the words I say, and they go, "Yeah, you actually said that." So for a long time, when I was a kid, I actually stayed with my parents in their room. You know, I had my own room, but um, they realized it was actually easier to keep me put if I was in their room, because instead of walking downstairs looking for them, I would just be there in their room. Because I think they installed cameras and they saw me walk downstairs and walk back up again and walk into their room, and they said I just had to look for them before I have a mental breakdown. I don't think it was like an anxiety attack because I wasn't in control of my body, and I was way too young and lived a really decent life that I really had no excuse of having any sort of anxiety attacks. So I think it was my uncle's suspicions of me having a full-on LSD fucking ball tripping move was generally. I tried googling brain releasing psychedelic like chemicals, and it's all none of it's naturally induced. It's mostly it's mostly or it could be that because I live in Southeast Asia, these mushrooms are really great to come by. So maybe I snorted some of the pores. I don't know.
Are you still here? That's the sunk cost answer. It's like you waited for a bus for half an hour, you haven't showed up. The right thing to do is wait for another half an hour. Right.
To put it in the more metaphorical term, I approached it from a different angle. So basically, I changed what I was studying.
How'd that work?
Worked out well.
Was
It's
it
the second time I tried it. It worked out well.
good? Good. So was that an unpleasant process?
Yes.
Were you confused?
Yeah.
Did you come out the other end?
Yeah.
Right on. Good work. You're more mature? You know more than you did 5 years ago?
I hope so.
Was it worth it?
I hope so.
All right. Good for you. Good for you. Well, look, you make a calculation. Eh? What's wrong with the University of Toronto? Well, there's 60,000 students for a starter. Like, what the hell do you matter? You know, really, your number. And it feels like that a lot of the time. You know, and so it's a very impersonal institution. And
Let's look at stuff together then. I didn't mean it that way. I meant let's look at this research together. Um, oh, there we go. The spirit molecule. Even Dr. Gonzo, the hell-raising summon attorney in Hunter S. Thompson novel Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, 1972, wouldn't touch extract or pineal. That stuff was the limit. One whiff and that shit would turn you into something out of a goddamn medical encyclopedia. I was having a fucking pulsing time downstairs. I was shaking violently and all these kind of things. So your head, yeah. You'll probably gain about 100 pounds in 2 hours, claws, bleeding rags, and you know it's about 600 heavy. So like, look back, man, I'll just try to so I never hell touch it. Fine, land. Its function isn't fully understood. Research do know it produces and regulates some hormones, including melatonin, regulating sleep patterns. So yeah, hey yo, we're fucked. I'm fucked. I was fucked when I was a kid. So there we go. Magic mushrooms, active ingredient. Hey yo, there we go. So generating controversy, some began to propose that its powerful psychedelic drug could be produced by the human body. So where is it? Yeah, okay, yeah. The one that my uncle said I had a trip like was DMT. it's produced by the body itself. But while researchers were successful verifying the purpose of serotonin and the function of the brain, the status of DMT remained notoriously complicated and unclear. Now we know that my head was producing DMT, which is what they handed out. I think that it's called dimethyl DMT. Dimethyl tryptamine. Yeah. It's 2 nitrogen, 2 methyl. Methyl is... Right, you know what? Let's just look at the chemical compound. 2 nitrogen, 1 hydrogen, methane. So these are methane gas. Methane. And petamine. Peta? Tripetamine. I think it's just the shape of the chemical. Yeah, basically a drug, but it's, according to researchers, it has been proven to be naturally generating in the human body. So, when I was a kid, I have had trips, free fucking trips, in a country where drugs are illegal, of DMT. According, if we assume. But it could be anything, it could just be a normal trip, right? From the 1950s throughout the 90s, and indigenous DMTs were thought to cause psychopathologies. In the early years of this research, psychiatrists hailed this so-called psychotomimetic compound, a compound that naturally mimics psychosis as a possible chemical key to cure schizophrenia. But assuming that I do have this, assuming that I have experienced this, assuming that I do have this, my grandfather, assuming that he had this as well, he was it the one where you lose your memories and you cease to function? Dementia? Parkinson's? Alzheimer's or dementia? So I think my grandfather was diagnosed with Alzheimer's and dementia. And assuming that maybe, I don't know, these kinds of chemicals could reduce its effects, I'm willing to go for a clinical trial. I'm willing to go for a clinical trial. Shoot me up with DMT. You know, I'm sure someone tried it. If I think of it, I'm sure someone has. DMT. Jesus Christ. There we go. Psychedelics as a treatment for Alzheimer's. So, this is cool. Coupled with reports of cognitive beliefs from micro-dosing, I mean, little bitty doses of LSD, little plastics in your tongue, suggest that they may have a therapeutic role in range of psychiatric and neurological conditions due to their potential to stimulate neurogenesis, provoke neuroplastic changes, and reduce neuroinflammation. Cognitive effects. High dose of psilocybin reduces attention to both clinical and physiological parameters. However, this may be due to an increased awareness of sensory stimuli. So in a 2018 uncontrolled open-label neutralistic trial found increased cognitive fluency, flexibility, and originality amongst the 33 participants at various microdoses of psilocybin. However, results should be interpreted with a degree of caution due to the risk of selection bias. It was organized by the Dutch Psychedelic Society. So yeah, there is a thing in the Netherlands where people do fucking take psychedelics. They sit in a circle and they do it. And I guess it's to promote the use of psychedelics. Who knows, right? In rat models, consecutive daily dosing diminished benefits, and older rodents' learning was enhanced by enriched environment. Okay, so it's like a curve. So yeah, it's actually really interesting. But fortunately, that's all the time I have for today, and I'll be ending the stream now. I've been streaming for... How long have I been streaming? 1 hour and 30 minutes. So yeah, thank you all for watching. Thank you, Adam. Thank you, Gabriel. And thank you, JJ, for joining the stream and liking the video. I'll be doing one of these sooner in a few days. Definitely not on the 13th, 14th, probably on the 15th night. So maybe I'll try and squeeze it in on the 11th. But 11th to 15th, one of those days in between, not the 13th or 14th, definitely for sure, I promise you. And yes, I'll be doing something like this more often. And hopefully the next one will be titled Let's Talk About 2. But I really don't have any topics in mind right now. I'll think of it over the next few days. But if you do have anything you want me to talk about or research, and any videos like lectures from prominent people, or probably another podcast that you actually want me to go look into, I am more than happy to do that. Or you want me to just do like those kind of reaction stuff and talk about things I hear, like what I did at the start of this video, do let me know. And that's all the time I have for today, unfortunately, because I do have some stuff I still have to get rid of. To go downstairs and spend time with my family because days are numbered. But yeah, I thank you all for watching. Thank you, Adam, again. Bye bye.